Now I'm trying to get the hinges off. I've had a lot of difficulty trying to actually get the pivot pins out. In fact, they won't move, they're frozen in place. The hinge itself is broken, as is the panel rusted. Can't get the bolts out, they're frozen in place as well. So, seeing the hinge has to be replaced anyway, I've started to cut through the hinge on both sides from the top, and then I'll come in from underneath and cut through the remainder of the hinge so I can actually remove the bonnet. Not what I wanted to do, but hinge has to be replaced anyway, and it'll be a lot easier to remove this when the bonnet's not in the way, so that's the plan at this stage. Now, removing the radiator should be reasonably straightforward once you've got the bonnet off. It's not held in by too much. There are a couple of brackets here on either side, one that side, one that side, 2 bolts into the frame under the bottom, and there's a couple of clips across the front here which actually hold the, in my case, they hold this aluminium, I guess it's a stone guard, which sits under the air conditioner condenser. Should be straightforward. Unfortunately, the condition of this car with the rust coming up from underneath, these bolts wouldn't come undone. These were tight. Had to apply a reasonable amount of heat to actually get them to move, but finally got it off. The radiator, or the engine, still had coolant in it, which after 37 years off the road, it's actually quite surprising. Looks reasonably clean. I mean, the rubbish on the top is where I've knocked bits of dirt into the container, but it's reasonably fresh looking for a 37-year-old coolant, so that's encouraging. The cooling fans, once you get the mounting off, this just unbolts. Once again, the bolts are a bit tight, but the cowling comes off. The fans are not original, I suspect. The mounts are slightly different. This had a 4-position mounting. It looks as though it was designed perhaps for a 3-position mounting. Now, I did have some other fans in a spare parts box which do have a 3-position mounting, so maybe these have been changed. I don't know. I'll have to look a bit more about that. The hoses, well, they've all got to be replaced anyway, so I've been taking those off. As I mentioned before, I'm going to start at the front and move backwards to try and strip as much out of this as I can before I try and lift the motor. I've just masked that off. That appears to be asbestos. I've just sprayed that with a bit of black paint just to hold the asbestos in place. I'll take that off later. As I say, I want to get as much off the motor as I can before I even consider lifting it out. I know you can probably do it with some of these things in place, maybe with even the manifolds, but I'd rather have it all off. It's got to come off eventually anyway. So that's how I've started at the front, removed the radiator, and now I'll start on the this section here, the Stromberg carburetors. And I looked up, did a bit of research on this overnight. Quite a complex mechanism. In effect, you've got two inlet manifolds with this, with butterfly mechanisms inside this piece here. It's connected by a lot of components, so I've actually got to start working out where I'll start, and when I do that I'll actually explain what I've done and how it comes off. It's something that doesn't appear to be covered in the manuals that I've seen. not even by the one line, you know, remove manifold. But it looks like I've got to undo a whole range of linkages from the accelerator. But once I work out how I'm going to do it, I'll actually explain what I've done. So when someone else tries to do this, they can perhaps save a little bit of time. And but at this stage I'll look at how I'll do it, and then I'll record some of the process. Or certainly I'll record an explanation of the process. There's a number of things to disconnect. The throttle, which I can disconnect there, and hopefully the linkage will just pull out from the wall, firewall, when I've undone this. This water pipe here into the bulkhead. There's a vacuum pipe here, which is that goes down to this vacuum reservoir here. That's got to come off. There was this other vacuum thing which has actually been blanked off, so goodness knows where that went. So I don't have to worry about that. So that's at this end. At the other end, there's another water pipe here. It's got to come off. The fuel line, of course, has got to come off. Now, with those, and of course I took the bypass hose off here into the water pump, so that's off. Now if I just disconnect all of those, and there's a thermal sensor here, it's got to be undone. But apart from that, I'm hoping that I can pull the whole lot off, or maybe I can just pull this off to start with, by undoing the bolts here. I'll maybe try that first. I'll see if I can just pull these two off the main manifold. That might be a good start, and I'll see if that works. Now, I've almost got everything off, but there's one unusual part, which is this return spring. Now I can't believe that was designed by Jaguar like that. It's connected to the throttle linkage somewhere underneath the rear Stromberg. It wraps around part of the subframe, front subframe, and then attaches to the heat shield here. As I say, I can't believe that's the way it should have been, but anyway, just found that, so I need to undo that. Once I've done that, these pipes, they're just so old that they basically just break apart. So that wasn't so bad, because I was having a little bit of trouble getting the clips off. So that's easy enough. So everything is pretty well off. I've just got to disconnect that throttle linkage in there, which is just a little clip. That's not a problem. And then that spring, and hopefully when I undo the bolts or the nuts on the back of the Strombergs in here, this will pull off. Anyway, that's the plan. I should have known it was too easy. It turned out that I didn't have all the bolts identified. Now, when you look at the design, you see that there are 4 bolts holding the carburetors on. I assumed that those studs went right through and into the manifold at the back. Well, that's partly correct. The ones at the top do, on both sides, but the ones on the bottom don't. In fact, there are studs on the back end of this housing for the 2 bottom studs, and there's a nut at the back. So I'm sure there's some Jaguar designer laughing his head off about someone trying to get this off and wondering why it won't move. Now the temptation is to take all those bolts off and start hitting it. I gently tapped it with a rubber mallet. When it wasn't moving, I figured there was something holding it. So, don't be tempted to bash these things. They're aluminium, and I'm sure they're going to break if you apply too much pressure. Now, even though I've undone those bolts, it still wasn't going to come out, so it was stuck on the bottom studs. So I used a dolly and very gently tapped on the back of that housing there, only gently, and it's just started to move. Then I realised that I actually have to remove this throttle linkage down here, which I've just unbolted off the firewall. The reason that is, these manifolds got to come right off those studs, and certainly the studs on the top are right out to here, so this has got to pull a long way out. So at this stage that should come off. So the next video you see, you should see that this carburetor is sitting on here, separate from the main manifold. Now that just proves that you can actually get it off. Finally, a lot of gentle tapping from the rear, and the reason being is that the studs, well certainly this stud, had a fair degree of corrosion on it, so it was jamming in the hole. But persistent tapping got it out. So the manifold, or this part of the manifold is out. I'll now take the rest of this out, which should be a lot easier. Now I can get at it. Trying to remove the manifold in one complete piece, I'm sure it can be done, but I just couldn't get my arms in properly, and you certainly can't see what you're doing. So this way should be a lot easier. Well, I say a lot easier, probably won't be, but it should be straightforward to take that off. So that's what I'm about to do. I'll just make sure I've videoed all the connection points for the wiring. That's also important, so when you reassemble you can look at these videos and see where these straps have been put across. Also, I found that the big spring that was put in there is in fact incorrect. If you look at the back here, there's actually a bracket to hold the return spring, so obviously they've lost that and put an enormous spring in place. Why? No one could really understand why. Maybe the local garage decided that was the easiest way to get it out of the workshop. Certainly not the right way to get it out of the workshop. Getting that manifold off is not easy. You can't get a socket into it. You've really got to go around with a short spanner and undo it. How you could do it with the rest of the manifold in place, well, it was hard enough doing without the manifold in place. It's taken me well over an hour to fiddle around underneath and get it undone. Even then I had trouble tapping it back. Problem being, first of all, it was catching on these which I assume is heater pipe. They are on the studs. I forgot that. I'd undone the studs, pulled the nuts off and the washers, but left those on, so that was jamming it a bit. And also I found that one of the studs, the central one here on the bottom of course, has obviously got a bit of corrosion in it, so it was stiff and had to be tapped out. Once again using my dolly there, gently tapping from the rear. So, it should pretty much come off now. I've still got a couple of studs that didn't come undone properly, but that should just fall off like that. So there it is, manifold off. I'll just keep going on something else now to strip this motor a bit more so I can actually see what I'm doing to take it out. Certainly when I put it back, I think I'll be putting the manifold on first and dropping the engine in with the manifold in place. It's just too hard and fiddly to try and get underneath and do things up.